Hello everybody, thank you very much for coming to this session. I hope everyone can hear me at the back. I'm Jill Aitken, I'm Director General of Professional Services at DWP, and that's a department that really understands about the challenges of change that we've got and that we're going to be discussing here today. We all know that the day job is huge. DWP, 20 million customers spending 3 billion quid a week. These things all take huge amounts of muscle and commitment. We also have welfare reform on the agenda, the biggest changes to welfare and pensions for a generation. And on top of that, we know we've got to spend less money. How are we going to do it? Jon Thompson, I'm delighted to introduce alongside Richard Heaton. Jon has a wealth of experience on the money side. He has played a part in all sorts of parts of government, from Ofsted to education to Treasury, and is now managing one of the more difficult budgets, that of the Ministry of Defence. So he's got a wealth of thought about how to tackle these challenges. He's going to speak to us for a while, talking about his take on these challenges, and then we'll open it up for questions. I'll act as a compere. We've got roving mics. Do ask us whatever you feel you would like to. And Jon, together with Richard Heaton, who is the Permanent Secretary at the Cabinet Office, as well as being our most senior drafting lawyer in government, the way in which people join up their jobs these days is part of the change agenda, I guess. They will answer your questions, and we'll be here. We'll finish just before noon. Jon.
Jill, thanks very much. Well, can I first of all say thanks very much for coming, and thanks very much for asking me to talk a bit about change, reform, and the challenges that we face. And I'm very happy to do that. The Ministry of Defence is currently going through the biggest transformation in Europe. And that's not our own claim. That actually is a statement from the Institute for Government's recent review of the Ministry of Defence. We have 18 transformational programmes. One of those is implementing the civil service reform, and one of those is implementing the 53 recommendations that Lord Levine left with the MOD in 2011 when he needed an independent review of the way the MOD works. So that's just two of a subset of 18 transformational programmes. So I joined the civil service in my early 40s in 2006, and since then I've got to say I've been really impressed with the qualities of the people that you meet. And I suppose I joined the civil service with the preconception that what civil servants did was policy development, but I wasn't really clear what else they did. And for the MOD, more than 98% of civil servants actually don't work in the traditional kind of space of policy development, the one that, if you like, the Daily Mail would say were classic civil servants. More than 98% of civil servants in the MOD do something in operational delivery or project management, science and technology, all of those kinds of areas. And there are incredible people working in those kinds of spaces. And outside you'll find some really tremendously interesting stands from the MOD, which has a massive presence in Bristol. So why have a civil service reform plan then if there are people within the civil service doing fantastic things? Well, I suppose from my perspective it was, did we really have enough capacity and capability to face the challenges that we need to tackle now and we need to go into the future? So to give you a very specific example from the Ministry of Defence's perspective, it's not obvious that the digital agenda is one that particularly applies to us because it's been, rightly framed in terms of interacting with the public, in terms of public service delivery. And for us, actually, the MOD doesn't particularly interact with members of the public in that kind of traditional public service delivery way, although we have a big community of veterans that we need to address and have a more digital service with, and we've implemented that. The challenge for us in digital is the internal digital agenda. We do not have, at the moment, in my opinion, a satisfactory internal digital agenda, a technology agenda that enables people to work in a much more modern way. We attempt to run more than 400 different business applications on a single information technology system. For those of you who work in the MOD, you'll be familiar with what that is, DII. And I don't find that particularly satisfactory. I don't think it's actually serving the needs of everyone in the MOD very well. We are not really able to interact in the way that you could do if we invested more and we solved that digital agenda. So that's one of the reasons why I thought civil service reform was essential. But I also thought it was essential in terms of a renewed focus on skills and on learning and development. The board this year in the MOD has increased significantly the learning and development budget. Now, whether our constituent organisations, the MOD, can then use that is for them to decide. But we, the board, have decided that that is a significant we needed to significantly improve learning and development and the funding of learning and development and the offer that you had, part of which is civil service learning, but also in our case, the Defence Academy. How do we improve learning and development? How do we make sure that we've got the kind of partnerships that we need, both within the organisation and beyond? So how do we align ourselves with the shared services agenda across government, and how do we bring the best of the private sector to work with the best of the public sector? And again, there's a standout there on Defence Business Services, which we think is a kind of groundbreaking deal we've done with Serco, where it's still retained within the Ministry of Defence, but it's run by the private sector. There are a couple of the civil service reform plan changes which I particularly wanted to highlight. And the first of those is on project and programme management. For us, PPM is a really essential part of our business. We spend about £7 billion a year on equipment projects, £1 billion a year on infrastructure projects, and we have this massive transformational change programme. And we have some fantastic programme and project managers. Query whether we have enough of those. And the development of the Major Projects Leadership Academy, which the Cabinet Office set up with Saïd Business School in Oxford, I think was a tremendous development. We have been working very closely with the major projects people on what's the best that the Ministry of Defence can offer in terms of project and programme management. We've had a centre of excellence for a number of years. Many of the things that we were already doing were adopted as being best practice, and then it's been expanded. I've been very keen on the MPLA. We've had 4 people going through each of the cohorts. We've been the major departmental contributor to that, and I think that's been a fantastic development for us. I've shared the platform with Lord Brown several different times. If you haven't read his report, it's definitely worth reading. How do we continue to enhance our capacity and capability to deliver projects on time, on budget, to the requirement which was originally set? Continues to remain a challenge for us going forward across all of those areas. The other one that I particularly want to reflect on was learning and the renewed focus on, if you like, on the modernisation of the HR policy set and processes and so on and so forth. If you go back to the staff survey in the MOD in 2012, 2/3 of people said we did not tackle performance management. We weren't addressing the issue. And Cabinet Office colleagues in the kind of HR function in the HR world, led by Chris Last, who I think works at the DWP, had been developing some new policy thinking. We've adopted that from the 1st of April. We've adopted it with a new arrangement on non-consolidated awards. Now, it has not been universally well accepted, but I would reflect back. What you said to us was, you're not tackling this problem. We've tried to do some innovative thinking. We've put in a new arrangement, and we see how that goes. So we're responding both to you and responding to the agenda which is right in the civil service reform plan. So for us, transformation of the Ministry of Defence, which is the 3rd largest organisation in the United Kingdom, is incredibly important. How we bring the Ministry of Defence up to the best practice which is elsewhere in the economy, how we tackle civil service reform, how we address all of Lord Levine's various recommendations about how we do this. That's interesting. Is incredibly important. We've done a lot. We've struck a new way of running our corporate support services. We've made a commitment to bring the army back from Germany, £1.8 billion worth of infrastructure investment in the UK, a huge change of 16,000 people and all of their families and all of the kit that we need to bring back, and that will be led by civil servants. Today, this afternoon, the Secretary of State will make some far-reaching announcements on reserves, and our approach has been to think of it in what we call the whole force concept. What's the best mix of civil servants, contractors, reservists and the military. How do we get the best blend of all of those things? And we're working on that. On the infrastructure organisation, we're going through how do we get the best of the private sector to work with our defence infrastructure organisation. The DIO, the Defence Infrastructure Organisation, is actually big enough to enter the FTSE at number 3 on its own, and it's just one of 7 organisations within the MOD. Now, we do some great work in that particular area, but are we getting the best practice which we could get from having a partner? So we're out in the market with that. We've engaged a partner on how do we transform IT? How do we bring to you the best of what could be done outside? So we're doing a huge amount of things across the piece. But for me, the remaining challenge, if you like, with the MOD is how do you go deeper than that? How do you change the culture of an organisation like the MOD? How do you change the behaviour within the MOD? And we came out with this thing called Be, Think, Do. Be a leader, think defence, and do it better. And it sounds a bit cheesy in a sense, but we thought it was really clear that that was the kind of behaviour that we wanted. That was the kind of culture we wanted. We wanted people to take responsibility. And so part of our reform is about delegation. So there's been a significant delegation from the board down to the services and the other organisations with the MOD. How much further can that go? Some head office functions have been reduced by more than 70% as a result of that shift in power, if you like, within the organisation. How much further can we go? We've launched a red tape challenge. How do we remove as much bureaucracy from the organisation? Most fantastically, the Ministry of Defence has taken bureaucracy to a completely new level. There are more than 900 corporate policies, including telling you how to put up a tent, how to write sentences and the balances between active and inactive verbs and all this kind of stuff. Just, taking the specification of corporate policies way beyond what I think is reasonable. And red tape challenges to try and cut that down, try to empower people, try to delegate as much as we can. So the board's taken the first steps. Long journey for something like the Ministry of Defence, given its history of how it got to where it got to in 2011, but we think we're making the right moves. And lastly, in the kind of cultural space, trying to significantly increase the amount of communications which is available within the organisation. Whether people agree with my views as the permanent secretary or those which I express on behalf of the board or not, you can't get away from the fact that we are trying to communicate as openly as we can, was because I don't think that the board and my predecessors particularly engaged in terms of communicating and listening and feeding back and so on. So we've deliberately tried a program of how do you communicate more, engage more, and so on. Now, it seems to me that might be enough to make a cultural shift, but we're continuing to learn and reflect, and I think that's also an important part of leadership. So that's kind of some reflections from me. There's a lot more about what we're doing in terms of changing. Jill, over to you.
Jon, thank you very much. Richard, did you want to chip in, or shall we just do it?
Can I chip in to say I've been reprimanded on Twitter, quite rightly, for not mentioning the fact that civil service serves not just the Westminster government, but also the government in Cardiff and Edinburgh. Northern Ireland is actually served by its own civil service, and it's quite an important point. I'm sorry I missed it. I mentioned it in London yesterday. Particularly bad one for me to omit it, because I was thinking of the things that I'd been most proud of kind of observing or being part of. I was in the fringes of it. Watching the civil service deliver the Northern Ireland peace process, for example, over a period of several years was the most extraordinary combination of tenacity and serving a generation of politicians who were very bold and getting amazing things done. But anyway, I forgot to say that we serve 3 governments, not 1, and it was a bad omission, so thank you for pointing that out. Instant response.
Thank you very much, Richard. Now, let's open it up for questions. Jon's posed some really quite interesting challenges. He's described a lot of what he is doing and what the MOD is doing and how it is facing the challenges that we all face. But he kept saying, how much further can we go? How much more can we do? How do we meet that challenge of culture and change? While you all think of your own questions, I'm just going to read one out. We did go through we asked people to put in questions in advance, and I'm not quite sure if Richard Dewdney is actually in this audience, but he asked us to answer: the spending review concluded last week. Spending cuts after the next general election are likely to be even more severe Where will future cuts fall? And what will that mean for service delivery, the reach of the state and the role of civil servants? A big question, I think, but any take on that, John or Richard?
You're looking at me, that's kind of interesting. Go on then.
I'll start tonight. I mean, one thing that kind of transcends the colour of the government is, as Jeremy Hayward put it yesterday, you know, we're in a 20-year struggle to rebalance the economy. Not to say it's going to be 20 years of cuts, but this is kind of with us. This concentrated but prolonged focus on efficiency is kind of part of the furniture. So, you know, we will not return to the days very soon that I remember when, you know, a good settlement from the Treasury and a spending review was, you know, flat cash, or, you know, you might hope for a +2. It's going to be with us, and it's not particularly a political thing. It's going to be with us. As to size of the state, I'm going to kind of slightly dodge that one because it's kind of broadly speaking, that's a kind of political, philosophical question, but it's going to be with us. There is a lot we can still do to drive out the cost of running government and to protect the front line, and I think that will always be the focus of government, I suspect. So you will continue to see a really relentless drive on spend and on how we spend. So John's department and mine have done a really kind of really unusual agreement at the spending review that we will have skin in the game of defence spending, because we know how important it is and how important it is to save money on the things that we buy. So you will see a relentless focus on property and on spend. There will be an effect on headcount. I'm sure there will be. I can't put any numbers on it, but I'm sure there will be. We are the smallest civil service since the Second World War. We'll probably continue to get smaller. We are extremely productive, which is fantastic. We are more productive than we were because we're doing the same amount of stuff and there are fewer of us. So I can't say precisely. I know it will continue. I know the focus will be on back office and on spend and protecting the front line, because that's the political direction. But there are things that will really help us get there, like digital, for example, which, if we get it right, will be transformation, not just in terms of the quality of the service, but in terms of money spent. John, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I'd agree with an awful lot of that. I mean, I think, you know, the Ministry of Defence has had to take out 20% of spend in 4 years, and it had built up this kind of incredible deficit in the years preceding this government. You know, Dr. Fox, the Secretary of State at the time, said it was £38 billion. Now, I can tell you it definitely was, because I gave him that number. And it, you know, the assumption that public spending on defence, for example, would continue to grow faster than the rate of inflation, significantly faster than the rate of inflation, was an interesting one. Clearly, we've taken out 20%, and that's involved some reductions of outputs. I mean, the fundamental question here is, how do you change the relationship between the input of public money and the delivery of outputs? I.e., how do you make your organisation more efficient? And to a certain extent, I think this spending review, as Richard said, did allow us to think about it really rather differently. I mean, I led our spending review negotiations because I thought it was so fundamentally important to the organisation. And the deal that we've done on public procurement, so that colleagues in ERG have to work with MOD colleagues in a partnership that drives down the cost of information technology, drives down the cost of common goods and services, I think was a really good step forward for the government overall. I mean, I mean, the Secretary of State in France has more described it as a groundbreaking deal. And that doesn't, what that means is some of the things that we do, we are the biggest purchaser of various common goods and services. How do you use the leverage we've already got for everyone else, because there's savings to be made for everyone else, but how do you use the expertise of people who work for Richard to drive down our costs on things like technology, where we have the second biggest HP account in the world, yeah? But does it feel like we've got that leverage on HP or not? Well, probably not. And that's not because you know, of anything that our own teams have done, because they've done a magnificent job. It's when you begin to introduce someone like Stephen Kelly, who you saw on, you know, on the video, it just adds a completely new layer to working as a team that can drive more value. And if you drive more value, then that's got to be a good thing. I mean, in the spending review, we agreed £875 million worth of further reductions, 600 million of which is from improving procurement in this kind of arrangement between the two of us. Now, that seems to me to be a pretty massive step forward in terms of the way that we're thinking about efficiency and leveraging the power of the government in a market. And I think there have got to be further developments in that space, and we'll be exploring those in the run up to 2015.
Thank you very much. Now it's your turn, and I'm going to peer out into the Who would like to ask a first question? Very good. Now, if you can wait for a roving mic, and then everybody will be able to hear you. And if you could just introduce yourself and where you're from.
Front row.
Here.
Down here.
Do we benchmark against other countries? If not, do we plan on doing so?
I love your opening. It was either Richard or the Prime Minister. I've never had that confusion before. Do we benchmark? I don't think we do scientifically. The recent, what was the name of the think tank that did that recent piece of work for us, IALS, looked at some international comparisons. The ones we tend to look at are the ones that are familiar to us, it occurs to me, and I get the same when we do comparative work on our legal system. So we tend to look at Australia and New Zealand a lot, and Canada, because it kind of looks and feels a bit like us. I think the really interesting examples, so I don't know the answer to your question, where do we fall on the benchmark? I'm sure there are studies measuring certain things. But I think some of the countries we ought to look at probably more are, for example, some of the Scandinavian countries, some of the North European countries that are kind of similar to us, because I think there are lessons there about public trust in institutions and the structure of government, which are quite a long way from our quite traditional Victorian departmental structures. And I think, just on the theme of doing things radically different, I think borrowing examples, this is probably for the next generation of civil service reform, borrowing examples from departments, from countries which do things radically different, probably have a probably smaller functional central government unit, but a better trust level with the citizens. There's some really interesting learning examples, and I just don't think we've tapped them. So the answer to your question, we do a bit of benchmarking, but not very scientifically. Could we do more? Yes, and I'd go for the Scandinavians and North Europeans rather than the familiar ones.
We've done quite a bit. I mean, there are three themes that we've followed over the last 12 months. One has been to do some reasonably high-level analysis between us and the so-called Five Eyes community, which is us, Canada, the US, Australia, and New Zealand. And they're very different kinds of defence models, but we've done a reasonable amount of work in that space to swap lessons learned about how do you do things more efficiently in particular. The second thing we've done is we've done quite a detailed analysis benchmarking between us and France, which is roughly the same size as us and has roughly the same kind of outputs, but does it in a very different way to us. And more latterly, picking up Richard's point, I've been doing quite a bit of work with the so-called Northern Group, which is Denmark, Holland, strangely, Norway and so on. And we've done some Finland, we've done some seminars on, at the permanent secretary level about, what do we learn from each other? What do we have to contribute? How are you tackling this issue and so on and so forth? So there is definitely something, particularly in defence, because it's very difficult, I think, to compare the Ministry of Defence with several other government departments. And so I'm looking for some kind of international comparison. How do you learn? What do you contribute? What can you bring back? So there is quite a bit of kind of away game across the whole of the civil service, going away, learning what you can learn from international comparators, bringing that back, seeing what you've got to offer. And there's a good deal of interest. It's worth really saying this. There's a really good deal of interest in what are we doing, some of which across the civil service is the first time it's been tested anywhere in the world. So there is some interest in what we're doing, as well as us learning from other people.
Some of the innovative things I mentioned earlier, I mean, the G8, two of the innovative things that this civil service has led on, transparency and social investment. The rest of the world, not the rest of the world, but several countries are clamouring to understand, what we're about. So there is this feeling, it's a slightly disruptive thing that we're about because of the challenge that we face, and it's kind of spawning these interesting ideas. And I think in some areas we should hold our head up high and realise we're ahead of the curve, but that's not to say it's a benchmark, that's just an observation, I think.
Of course, there are fabulous things that we deliver every day, whether it was the Olympics last year or things that all of you will be doing on a daily basis. There is some international work on how well governed we are. It's not just about the civil service, but it's also about the rule of law, it's about decision making in local authorities too. And on those sorts of measures, we do reasonably well. We're up there in the top, in the top, certainly in the top quartile and even better. Next question. There's a lady here in the front for the roving mic, and it won't take long to get to you.
Hi, I'm Jill Child from Cardiff. Somebody said earlier on today that people come into the civil service in many different stages of their life, and I'm one of those people. I'm going to swear now, having worked in the banking and finance industry for 38 years and come in after my husband died, because I thought I'd retired, and had to come back in after my husband died to a job to comfort me, I suppose, and something I could do for 6 months. That was 5 years ago now, and I feel that the challenge to be exceptional as a civil servant is something that now I want to try and rise to again after dealing with that situation. And I'm not alone in that, I'm sure. Working mums with children who are now got to an age where they can probably give more back to the civil service and want to be exceptional as well. Through the period of time I've been in the civil service, which is 5 years, I've had 3 different jobs, pension credit, DWP with Job Centre Plus, and now I'm working with a department, lovely department, Access to Work, who are now going through a lean process of our own. The main thing I would like to say is coming into the civil service, I don't know what I was expecting from coming from a big organisation like a bank. But I was surprised that there wasn't more challenging or some channeling really of people with particular skills into the right jobs. I do even find that now with jobs that are advertised, or even jobs that aren't advertised probably is the best way to say it, because when they come at a higher level, instead of looking for people with skills, they are filling them with people, a surplus in grades for that job. So I don't know whether you're going to get those exceptional civil servants coming through if you're not looking at their skills to match the jobs that are being advertised and filling them with people who are surplus in grades of jobs, nothing to do with what they're applying for.
What a great... So it's all about getting the right people into the right jobs. How are we going to do that better?
Well, there's a reason why you got applause to that point, isn't there? Because it's absolutely bang on, isn't it? I mean, I think it's quite... Look, just pick up the point about the redeployment pool. I mean, if you want to use that phrase, or people are surplus or whatever, I mean, we have a legal obligation to those people, don't we? And I think it's appropriate that the current processes do go around. Can you fill a vacancy from people who are, with people who've got skills and are surplus? And I mean, we run a process where if you can match most of it, but you can't match it all, then some learning and development should be offered to you. And I think that's the right thing to do as a responsible employer. Now, the focus here, and I said it a bit in my introduction, has got to be on how do we emphasise learning and development, because certainly in the Ministry of Defence's case, in 2009 or 10 or whenever it was, a short-term decision was made to slash L&D, and I think that was a mistake. That is my perspective. I spoke against that at the time. I don't think that was a particular... I mean, at a time when you're reducing the number of people you've got, then you've got to do exactly what you say. And I think you've got to invest in L&D. I mean, that's my perspective on it. And we took the reverse decision. I didn't particularly understand what it was. So this year, despite the fact that the budget's gone down, the board's put several £1 million into further investment in learning and development, because I think that's incredibly important to try and improve people's skills to be able to do the jobs in a better way. Have we got this right? I mean, in our case, no, we don't have it right. Are we trying to tackle the problem? Well, we're trying to, but it's in our case there are 60,000 people that you're talking about in terms of the number of civil servants, and that is quite a long process to make sure that you get the right kind of processes and policy and skills and learning and development offer in the round to be able to address your problem. So yeah, I'm recognising it's there. We're trying to do something about it. Have we cracked it? No, but we're trying. Do you want to add to that?
I don't think I do. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for that question. And another, There's a lady here on the aisle.
Hello, my name's Sandra Armstrong. I work in the Cabinet Office. When I joined the civil service 25 years ago, there were no computers on the desk. We could smoke at our desk, and your team leader was down the hallway in their own room, and you had to call them by Mr. and Mrs. Smith or whatever their name was. And I look back now and amazed at how the modern civil service works. And I'm sure when we look back in 25 years, we'll be saying things like, well, of course we deliver digitally, of course we have a common security pass, of course we work flexibly and do different things. My challenge as a manager, and I'd be interested to know how you react to these challenges, how in the busyness of change do we create breathing space to try and think of being bold in new things, and in that, is there allowance to, if we're going to try new things and fail, let's fail fast and learn and carry on. I think the challenge is we still flog a dead horse sometimes and don't let it go and move on. Yeah,
Sandra, it's a great question. I remember those. I remember starting in 1991, and I come from the bar, which is hardly a kind of progressive profession, but they had funny little word presses on your desk at the bar, and you came to the civil service, and there was nothing in sight. It was extraordinary. And I remember asking my team leader, "Can we have computers on our desks?" And he said, "It might happen in your lifetime, Richard. It won't happen in mine." And that was extraordinary. So we have come a long way. And it's just kind of worth logging that. Fail quickly. It's a great Google phrase, I think. There's something really powerful and valuable about that. Finding the space and the time to kind of incubate ideas. It's a really kind of fascinating thing. And sometimes in the Cabinet Office, which is a huge, disparate department, and sometimes I struggle even to kind of work out what the single combining narrative is of a department that goes from number 10 to driving procurement reform to looking after the voluntary sector. And I'm thinking, how can we just get better in the way we support each other, the way we work, the kit we have, the way we arrange ourselves, the way we think. And sometimes the answer is inviting people with license to just kind of do it, to just think of things that they're enthusiastic about. My inspiration for this is something from the part of London I live called Southwark, called guerrilla gardening, where a bloke who lives in a tower block in the Elephant, who's a keen gardener, dug up a roundabout, traffic roundabout, bit of kind of barren land in the middle of a roundabout, and planted, I think, rhododendrons or sunflowers. And he started doing this around the Elephant, which is kind of pretty grimy bit of inner city. And Southwark's first reaction was to arrest him for criminal damage. And then they thought, actually, this is quite cool. And so now, wherever you go, where I live, every little bit of earth around a lamppost is full of kind of planting. And I kind of really love this spirit because if someone does guerrilla gardening, for me in the Cabinet Office, they're not doing it to my direction. I'm sure they get a license from me, a permission if they think they need it. But otherwise, I'm really keen for people to try things and incubate them locally. It's this kind of disruptive idea because, frankly, you get the best results. You get people using discretionary effort. You get things which kind of give enormous satisfaction. And you're never going to spend time guerrilla gardening if the rhododendrons aren't going to take root. So the kind of failure mechanism is built in as well. So that's not the answer to everything, but I do think we've somehow, in big bureaucracies, we've relied too much on the kind of, the great big change plan and 15 things which go on forever and never get closed down. There's room for that. Transformation has to be planned, and change management is about, successful planning, objectives and delivery. But sometimes it's about disruption as well, is my take on it.
Guerrilla gardening in MOD. Does that work?
I don't know. I'll definitely pick up your last point about killing things off. I mean, I'm completely with you. I mean, I think if something's not working or it's flawed or whatever, we ought to be brave enough to kill things off. But just to illustrate the cultural challenge that you've got, I mean, I can remember a couple of years ago, we had an equipment project which... Our equipment projects broadly run in two phases. You have a phase where you assess whether it can be done, and then at the end of that, you decide whether you're going to manufacture something. I mean, there are more stages, but broadly it's that. So at the end of the assessment phase, the appointed contractor comes back, says, I've spent £130 million, that's the entire budget, including the manufacture, and I can't make it work. So we say, well, obviously that's pretty disappointing that you spent all that money and it doesn't work. Why not? And they tell us, give us some excuses and whatever, and we say, well, we'll get an independent review. So we get the professor of nanotechnology at Cambridge University comes along, does a review, and says, well, there's a reason why this project won't work and why you've spent £130 million, and that's because in order to meet your requirement, you've got to break the laws of physics. Right? And this comes up at the board, and the person who's promoting this project comes along and says, well, I've done an independent review, and in order to do it, we'll have to break the known laws of physics. Do you want to carry on or not? Well, no, really. And but it took 2 years for that project to be formally closed down. Now, I think, are we going to fail quickly? And once you recognise you've done something that isn't going to work, kill it, knock it on the head and close it down as fast as you can. Learn what you can learn from how you got to that point. Put that back into the system, and hopefully, you improve. I mean, that's my takeaway from it. But don't underestimate the cultural challenge of the people who own what it is that you're trying to do.
I'll let you into a secret. There was a discussion about whether we should, at the Civil Service Awards, and I hope you're all putting in for the Civil Service Awards. The nomination period is open. There was a discussion about whether we should have best failure.
Yeah, there was. Yeah.
But see how that would play, and there'll be press stories about civil service celebrating failure and all the rest of it. It's quite difficult. But there is something really, really key there about not just stopping things, but encouraging people to do things which might fail. So I'd certainly encourage it.
Very good. I'm hearing there a real permission to all of you to go away and be thinking bottom up. What can we do to make things better? How can we be innovative? And our part of the bargain is that we make sure that we control things when they get out of control. So it's top down and bottom up. Next question. We're getting some really good questions today. Two at the back. So the lady on the left.
Back. It's going on the back.
My name's Lucinda Carr. I'm from the MOD in the Ship of Lost Souls that is Abbey Wood. A question for all the panel, I think. I wonder if you could tell us a little bit more about what the senior civil service, as our leaders through this most difficult time, are doing to transform the senior civil service as an entity in terms of everything from capability, capacity, performance management skills. Or to put it bluntly, and I apologise to my POS for this in Daily Mail speak, how can we have built up a deficit of 38 billion and no one been sacked?
Looks like it's me.
Yeah, well, Jill's doing some leadership later on. Do you want to lead it?
I'll do it. Well, I'll lead off and then Richard can add, unless you want to have a crack at. Well, I mean, I think it was disgraceful that the MOD managed to build up a £38 billion black hole. I mean, that was a lack of somebody taking responsibility and being held to account. And, when I joined in 2009 and sat down and, with the finance team and said, well, where are we? And they say we're £38 billion in a hole, which is roughly 10% of the budget. It's a pretty shocking fact. And then you confront people with that fact, and then they basically duck it, and I thought that was pretty outrageous. And there was some significant private grief between me and several other people on the board at that particular time, which you can't go into in public. And I just don't think that was acceptable at all. Frankly, I think it was disgraceful. And we tried to sort it out, and sorting it out has been really painful. To go back to where you started, look, I mean, the senior civil service of the MOD. We have done some serious work with them. We brought in a guy called Steve Radcliffe, who was Gus O'Donnell's coach, actually, and we've been through some very structured sessions with senior civil service in the MOD, that it's their responsibility to be leaders, what it means to be a leader, that it is your responsibility to communicate and explain and listen and reflect and set the strategy and keep out of the detail and empower other people and so on. But the really shocking statistic for me is, as I said, we're going through the biggest change program in Europe, according to the Institute for Government. 75% of the senior civil service of the Ministry of Defence did not think that change was led very well. And I had to stand in front of them in March of this year. I got all of them together in Shrivenham, if you know the Ministry of Defence, in Shrivenham, and then say, this is pretty disgusting. That's 3/4 of you don't believe in each other. You're not a team. And so we've been doing some very structured work with them on that, confronting them with that they have to be leaders and take responsibility and so on. And then the upshot of that was we had a very, very lively conversation. It was the most interesting day I've spent in the civil service ever. At the end of it, what we gave them was an offer. We gave them 7 different things that they could do to improve themselves. And they had to choose at least one. So it could be have a coach or go on some structured L&D to improve yourself as a leader, engage with civil service, learning on structured L&D and so on. So we gave them an offer of 7 different things and then said, you've got to choose at least one. And by the way, if you don't choose one and do it, then it's really going to impact on your career because you are not improving yourself as a leader. We've then sampled all of the objectives that the senior civil service set to make sure they've all got it in there, and then we'll be testing to see whether they do it. Because it seems to me that's absolutely incumbent on you as a leader to continue to try and improve yourself as a leader. But that wasn't part of the MOD's culture, and I've absolutely been clear, and I think the senior civil service so far has responded to that. The number of people who've taken up coaching offers has rocketed. Had a working one-to-one with somebody about their impact as a leader. So I'm trying to be completely brutal, and this is, it's reasonably public. I've also taken to, okay, if you don't want to respond to this, if you don't want to be a leader, I don't want you to work here anymore. Because it's absolutely incumbent on the SCS of the MOD to lead. And if you don't want to do that, well, I think you're working in the wrong organisation, frankly. And there have been some people, and I'm okay with this, right, who come to me and said, you know what, I just don't want to do this. And I can respect that. And, they've exited the organisation. And I'm okay with that. I'm okay with debate. I love the debate, right? But eventually you have to decide whether you're going to lead or not. And that requires bravery and integrity and authenticity and all of those kinds of things. And if you can't respond to that and you're honest about it, well, I'm okay with that. So there have been some exits as well, and we've recruited and promoted. So there is also a refreshment of the senior civil service and a reduction in line with the number of people who works in the MOD. So we tried to keep the ratio of senior civil service to everyone else roughly the same as we reduce the overall numbers, so that the impact of reductions is felt by the senior civil service too. But you might want to add a bit about learning.
Well, that's really interesting account of how it feels in a particular organisation, and organisations are going to be different, but none of our organisations is going to succeed, none of them, without an engaged SCS that knows how to lead. It doesn't come naturally. It's something that can be learned. So I think, Jill, you're leading a session on leadership later, aren't you? I think. I saw the programme, right? So I just want to broaden it from the SCS, because it sounds like I wouldn't kind of go into kind of global SCS bashing, because heaven knows there are some brilliant SCS across the civil service, just as there are in all grades. But just to broaden it a bit about this personal responsibility and accountability thing, it's a really, really important theme in the civil service reform plan, because some of what causes inertia and frustration is just individuals not kind of getting that actually the buck stops with them wherever the grade is, or that they can make a difference, or that actually if they just let something go by, or they sit on something, or they squash an idea, the whole thing cumulatively grinds to a halt. So it's this personal accountability. And you call it leadership. Sometimes it is leadership, but sometimes just responsibility is just a better word. And sometimes if that's not the culture, it's incredibly empowering and enlivening culture when you get it going. And I left Jill's department a few years ago, and I kind of felt it was taking root there. This idea that the best leader I've ever come across in the civil service, I was doing it when I was in DWP. I was doing a sort of back to the floor week in, I think it might have even been this city, but it was a city with a disability carers centre, disability centre, and there was a bloke called, I think, Hanif, and he was an EO, and he ran a team of sort of 3 or 4 people, and he had kind of got some bit of corporate jargon initiative thing, and he'd kind of worked out what it meant for his team, and he kind of told me about how they'd rearranged their work or their scheduling to accommodate this, and he just kind of captured it, and he kind of came alive, and he was buzzing, and it was extraordinary. It was kind of almost visible, tangible leadership. So I don't make it an SCS thing. It's just that sort of responsibility and really up for itness, and the idea that you as an individual can work out, cut through the jargon, cut through bureaucracy, and lead your team was just. I remember coming away feeling really. Maybe this guy's in the room. I don't know. There's a Nicole Hanif who remember having that conversation with him about 3 years ago. Thank you very much, because it stayed with me.
DWP has been concentrating hugely on this, and I think one of the changes that I notice when I talk to colleagues across government is just how much more time we now spend talking about our people. So the board of DWP meets every Monday afternoon, and every 3rd or 4th week we spend at least 2 hours talking about our SCS in a way that 10 years ago we wouldn't have dreamed of doing. And those messages about that we will now absolutely be rewarding the how and not just the what, I think becoming embedded. I'm seeing that more across when I talk to other colleagues from other departments too. So I hope we're now pressing the right messages, and there's certainly the way in which we're judging people's success. It's no longer possible to succeed because you delivered something at enormous cost to the organisation or your staff, for example. You succeeded, but the how was lacking. Absolutely impossible now, I hope, to be able to get a bonus, for example, for that kind of work. So thank you for that question. And there was a lady next to you, I think, who was also... No? We've covered it. Excellent. There's a gentleman here, a lady here, sorry.
Hello, my name's Beverly Anderson. I work for the Ministry of Justice. I attended the introduction meeting when you spoke about transforming justice, transforming the civil service. And I heard some of the comments from our current leaders, how exceptional we all are, how well we work, how, you know, we're giving the public you know, a service for the money, etc., etc. However, what I want to say, you talked in that speech about there was a debate between fast streamers and 16 and 17-year-olds who said that the civil service doesn't sell itself. Okay? When you want to recruit people, it doesn't sell itself. As a frontline officer, and I've been a civil servant for 10 years, it's difficult to sell ourselves when our own government stand in Parliament and say that we get 7% pay rises automatically. It's difficult to say when our own Chancellor says that the private sector are paying for the public sector. Anybody that's a frontline officer in any department will tell you that we have moved with change, we have done everything, and I am an exceptional public servant, I am a proud public servant. But when is this government, and when are you as senior civil servants going to say, stop vilifying our civil servants and our employers to the media and stand up for us and say exactly what you said in that speech? It's absolutely diabolical.
I completely get that. I completely get that. And the reason I spent, you know, a bit of time just actually dwelling on and trying to get under the skin of just why we are so fantastic is because I don't think, as I said, I don't think we say it enough. And I said it yesterday, and press were in the room, and I would say it in any public forum. And it really, really bugs me when I feel that the political debate sells us short. I think it's grossly unfair, and it's miserable. It doesn't help. The civil service doesn't function well when there is this perceived kind of war of Whitehall, which is the phrase that some of the journalists use. It doesn't help when we feel that we're not aligned with our ministers. If you'd heard, and I'm not going to try and give a political response because I think part of what you said requires a political response. I'm not obviously going to try and do that. Although Francis Maud, who was on the platform yesterday, said, you know, if I say 10 things about the civil service, the positive and one negative, it's always the negative that gets reported. We do have this conversation quite a lot with ministers about the tone in which the civil service is portrayed in the media. All I would say is don't take the most, you know, negative reporting as necessarily what's being said by the mainstream ministerial team. By and large, I think we get fantastic support, as you saw on that clip from our ministers. It would be fantastic, wouldn't it, if there were more opportunities, if they said more of that in public. And to be honest, we do have that conversation behind closed doors. We give them exactly the challenge that you've given me. Sometimes politically it's difficult, sometimes they feel able to do it. I would like to move to a time when we all felt more confident about saying with a united voice that we are ministers and civil servants trying to do the best for Britain and make things better for our citizens, because that's why we came into the civil service and that's why they went into politics. So we've got an awful lot in common, and I would love this perceived kind of war to end, because it's bloody annoying and it's unfair, and we certainly don't deserve it. It's not characteristic of what many of our ministers think of us. I know it's not, because I've heard them say so. But yeah, you're right, the way the public debate is heard, it sometimes feels very unbalanced.
John, how does that feel in defence?
Well, I completely agree with what you just said. I think the question is really good. I was talking to a couple of colleagues before we came in here about why did the Chancellor make the statement he did on Andrew Marr about protecting the military and cutting civilians. I mean, it was completely regrettable that he did that in that way, and you know, we didn't know he was going to do that. I mean, a kind of military good, civilian not so good argument in public is not helpful at all. Not what we agreed to do, and you know, it's become a political issue. The challenge to your question for someone like Richard and I is, how does someone like me respond in a public way that would get any kind of recognition? Because I have some fantastic people who are doing amazing things, and I'm quite happy to say that here, and I'm quite happy to say it in public. But you know, how does that work? Is it going to be me versus the Chancellor of the Exchequer on Andrew Marr? I mean, it's not going to work, is it? So, I mean, we've actually given this question back to... I blog a couple of times a week, and we have this kind of interactive blog site, and I'm getting quite a lot of grief at the minute about exactly the question that you asked. And the question we put back is, what do you want me to do? I'm very happy to do something. At people's suggestions. So, you know, if you work in the MOD at the minute, you can email me direct, right, and you'll get an email response from me. Put it on my blog site. Give us some suggestions about what else could somebody like me do? Because I think this current political debate is not helpful at all.
We've come to the end of our time. We've had some really fantastic questions. I'm really grateful to all of you who have spoken so frankly and have spoken from the heart and put questions to Jon and Richard. I hope we've done justice to those questions. I hope you found it interesting. Thank you very much for coming, and enjoy the rest of your time at Civil Service Live.